So I was a little confounded the first time I saw that squirrel in the zoo. I'd gone to Taiwan with my family, and they took us to the zoo, and I thought, this is going to be awesome, because we're going to see so many great animals, pandas, I hope. We're in Asia. So imagine my surprise when we rounded this corner, and there's this little pen or cell, and in it sat one squirrel, just one little squirrel, like it was some exotic little animal. And then I thought, actually, I guess even though I grew up in upstate New York, and I'm used to seeing squirrels running up and down trees, it is exotic here in Taipei. Years later, I thought back to that squirrel in the zoo, and I could kind of relate to him as a Christian in the workplace. So I've worked a total of 20 years now, 10 years in the States and 10 years in China. It's kind of a pivot year, and everyone keeps asking what we're going to do next, and we really don't know. But having spent some time in both countries and worked with a number of companies, I feel like we've had a really interesting experience thinking about the workplace as our mission field, my husband and I. We started off at Procter & Gamble, which is why Crossroads is our home church. I went over abroad as a Pantene brand manager in the early 2000s. Then I came back to the States, and then I went back with Apple, stayed out there with IHG, and have just transitioned to Starbucks. So let me step back to when I first got the offer to go as an expat as the Pantene brand manager. They didn't expect me to speak Chinese. And so they just brought me abroad because they thought, you've already been working on Pantene, and we like the way you look at the hair care business. But I felt a little proud of myself, and I thought, well, I think I speak Chinese. I'm going to be all right. And then I got there, and I realized nobody's telling me to make my bed, pu chang, or to brush my teeth, 刷牙了没. And everything they were saying, I really didn't understand. So it turns out I actually didn't speak Mandarin. So I ended up getting a Chinese teacher and trying to pick up as quickly as I could, not to mention learning how to run a business, how to have ABMs working for me for the first time. It was really challenging and very exciting. And working in China still is. So one day I'm walking down the hallways. I'd been there in Guangzhou for maybe 2 or 3 months, and this young girl stops me. And she's, this really sassy, she still is really sassy. And she kind of looks at me and she goes, aren't you a Christian? And I said, yeah, I am. And she's like, so why haven't you started a Bible study? She caught me a little off guard. I didn't even really know her. So I kind of went, well, she said, look, I'm a Christian, but nobody here is. And this building is like where the communists meet on the weekend. This is like not God's house. So can you start a Bible study? It wasn't really a question. And I said, well, yeah, of course I can. And that's sort of how God talks to me, because I'm a little dense and I need it to be very straightforward. So we started a study, and it started to grow really quickly. The thing about China and many other places is people have not yet heard the name of Jesus. And they're curious and they want to understand. So we got kind of big kind of quickly. And back then, I was pulled aside and told, this isn't sort of legal, and maybe these are things you shouldn't be doing anymore. You need to think about stopping. So we took that seriously, my husband and I. We prayed about it, and we really thought about that age-old question. On one hand, is this God kind of giving me a warning and taking care of me, protecting me? Or is it, on the other hand, the enemy trying to thwart something that's good? These are always the questions we ask ourselves, and the big and the little things. And with all the questions we ask, I went to the Bible, the source of truth. And everywhere I flipped, because it's in multiple places, I landed on the Great Commission. So I thought, well, yeah, that's pretty clear. We are to be the voice, and we're supposed to share about the gospel to the nations. So I kept going. And my husband supported us a lot because we were meeting in our apartment. And it was like a family effort, as witnessing often is. So we had all these people coming to our apartment at some level of risk back then, And here's the amazing thing, though. As we started to engage and to talk with them, people started to get to know Jesus. And eventually, all of them came to know the Lord. And their brothers, their husbands, their boyfriends, parents, all came to know Christ. It was the most humbling thing to be a part of. You literally feel like the fisherman who threw down his nets, because you're like, I'm not equipped to do this. I don't know what I'm doing. But you just go. And that's the whole point of this, is I had to do very little. I simply had to obey. And when we obey, God can use us. And he can use us in the most mighty, unexpected ways, truly the least of them. The other thing I'd like to share with you today is we obey even if we don't know what the end state is sometimes. So think about Abraham. God didn't tell him, go to the end of the street, stop at the big oak tree and I'm going to bless the heck out of you. He just said, go. And without knowing what the end was, he obeyed. And I think that's a lot of what we need to do in our lives. It's easy to obey if you know exactly where you're going and when you're going to stop and what it looks like, but to just participate in what God's doing around us, it takes a little bit more faith. So at this point, in my second story, I'm working at Apple, and similarly, amazingly, we end up starting another Bible study. This woman, I have to stop and tell this story. Hopefully I have enough time. I'm really frustrated. There are a lot of things going on in my life and work that I'm feeling really challenged. And I remember telling God that morning in my quiet time, if you don't show me a Christian here or somebody who specifically needs me to mentor and support them, I'm going back to P&G. I love P&G. So then I went to go get my coffee at our Nespresso machine, and this girl's standing there next to me. I don't really know her, and she looks at me and she goes, "Your kid's at YCIS school, right?" And I said, "Yeah." She goes, "Do you know so-and-so?" And I said, "Oh, yeah." And then she goes, "Do you know that person's a Christian?" And I said, "Yeah, so am I." So that was her way in. And she goes, "Me too." And I said, "Oh, you're a Christian. Would you like to do a Bible study with me?" Since I just prayed about it. This girl breaks down in tears. She goes, "Oh my gosh, I just had my quiet time and I just prayed, God, I'm quitting this job unless you show me a Christian, but not just a Christian willing to do a Bible study with me." So I looked at her and she looked at me and we both said, "Yeah, I guess we'll stay here because God's got something bigger here." So we did, and this Bible study began to grow, and she's such a huge blessing. There's so many other miracles and amazing stories I could tell you, maybe another time. The point of this story is actually not Jessica or the Bible study at Apple, which still runs strong. Actually, it's something that happened 4 years later. So count them, 1,500 days later, somebody from Apple reached out to me on WeChat, and she said, "Could I buy you a drink?" And I'm always like, "Well, yeah, I'd love a drink. Single malt's great." And so we've sat down, and as I pick up my drink, and I toast her and say, "It's been a long time. I'm so glad you reached out to me." She's like, "Well, there's something I want to tell you today, and there's something I want to ask you." And I thought, okay, well, then I'll just enjoy, and I'll listen to you. And she said, for a lot of us, we saw you guys, the Christians, praying and meeting, and we knew you were praying for us. We knew kind of what you were doing. And what I want to say is I appreciate it. I didn't really want to be a part of it, but I appreciate that you didn't push anything on me, and yet you were still really nice to me and really great to work with. Here's the thing now. I'm getting married in a few months, and I was thinking a lot about what kind of marriage I want to have. And the one marriage that kept coming to mind is yours, you and your husband, Minky. I like the way you guys are, and I want some of what you have. And what I think you have is God, so I want some of that. 4 years later. All in Chinese, of course, but it's kind of translated. So I got to pray with her, and now she's a believer and she's happily married, and actually she's moved to the US. It's amazing how God works. And it's amazing how when we plant seeds in our obedience, how maybe years later something comes to life. And in this particular story, I had the blessing of seeing it come to life and, flower and blossom. But not always do we. And we have to have faith that when we obey, though we don't know where the end is or what the bigger picture is or even exactly what our role is in this story, we have to have the faith to know that if we're obeying, something will happen, something good. In Isaiah, God says, "My thoughts are not your thoughts, and my ways are not your ways." He's not trying to sound distant from us. He's speaking truth in that he is above time and he has a big picture and we just get to be a part of it. So my encouragement to you is to obey, to listen and be sensitive to where the Holy Spirit might be calling you, whether it's in the workplace or it's at home or it's in the community, whether it's in China or the States or anywhere else in the world. If you are sensitive and if you see where God might be working and you see where you might be called and you jump in obedience, even if you don't know where the end is, you are going to be so blessed, and you're going to get front row seats to some of the most amazing stories that ever take place on this earth. And thanks for listening to some of mine today.